My brother had the police drag away my 10-year-old son in handcuffs over a false accusation. My parents watched and did nothing. Ora. What I did next destroyed all their careers. I am Joel, an interventional cardiologist at a major California hospital. I'm 40 years old, Sabota, and my life is built on precision and control. You have to be when you are threading a catheter through an artery to fix a failing heart. The stakes are immediate and absolute. Failure means death, success means sending someone home to their family. That focus, Sabota, that detachment needed in the operating room, has always been my professional strength. Boda. It's what allowed me to pay off years of medical school debt and provide a good life for my family. My home life is comfortable. My wife, Rachel, is a school nurse part-time. Our son Dylan is 10, energetic, and plays soccer. Our daughter, Sophie, is 6, quiet, and reflective. We have a house in the suburbs, good schools, and a rhythm that Rachel, and I value structure, stability, and enough money that we don't worry. This quiet, stable life is the exact opposite of the high-octane drama I deal with daily at work. It's also the exact opposite of my brother's life. Blake is 4 years older than me, a high-powered criminal defense attorney with his own firm. While I fix hearts, Blake defends executives who broke laws. He is the golden child, the obvious success story my parents always brag about. Blake drives a luxury car, wears expensive wristwatches, and lives in a gated community. Every family gathering, and they were a tradition we maintained, was a stage for his performance. He would casually drop names of judges and prosecutors he golfed with, ensuring everyone knew his importance. I was merely the doctor. Must be nice working for someone else. He'd say about my hospital job, completely disregarding the specialization, the income, and the pure satisfaction of the work. The truth is, my resentment towards Blake ran deep, stemming from a lifetime of passive favoritism from my parents. When Blake passed the bar, it was a massive party. When I finished my 7 years of post-medical school training to become a specialist, it was a quiet family dinner. Our parents, a retired electrical engineer, and a former stay-at-home mother lived 20 minutes away in the big style house where we grew up, Boda. They enabled Blake's arrogance and dismissed my successes as merely stable. They never missed a chance to praise Blake and rarely missed a chance to subtly critique me. I had learned to swallow the resentment, Boda, to disengage, and to find my value in my work and my immediate family. But that deep, simmering frustration, that feeling of always being secondary, was a constant undercurrent to our interactions. It was this tension, this history of Blake always being right and me expected to defer, that set the stage for everything that happened. Blake's world operated on power and connections. My world operated on facts and consequences. He was certain that his connections allowed him to bend the rules. I was certain that, in the end, justice, like biology, always adheres to immutable laws. I just never expected those two opposing views to collide with my son standing in the middle. We were due at my parents' house this Saturday for lunch. My mother had called earlier in the week to confirm, promising lasagna. Dylan, my 10-year-old, was excited, already planning to run straight to the backyard for a game of soccer with his grandfather. Sophie, 6, was quiet as always, packing her coloring books to sit quietly in a corner. It was just another routine family obligation, the kind you keep because family matters, even when the underlying dynamic is fundamentally broken. The drive to my parents' house that Saturday morning was typical. Rachel drove, steady and patient, while I handled the radio and navigated. Dylan was restless in the back, buzzing with anticipation. Do you think Grandpa fixed the goal net yet, Dad? He promised last time. I smiled. He always keeps his promises, buddy. Now try to sit still. Sophie, next to him, watched the passing houses, her silence noted but dismissed as her natural reserve. When we arrived, the tension was already established. Blake, his wife Nicole, Boda, and their son, Austin, were already there. Blake barely moved from the plush living room sofa, Boda, seemingly more engrossed in his phone than in family. He wore a heavy, gold wristwatch, the kind that costs more than a decent used car. When I entered, he gave a dismissive nod that spoke volumes. The man couldn't stop reminding everyone of his success, his superior status in the family hierarchy. Must be nice, Joel, working those civil servant hours, he commented, not even looking up from his screen. You should think about moving into private practice. The real money is made when you're the one billing the insurance. I offered a small, non-committal grunt. There was no winning that argument. My steady, essential career would always be settling in his eyes. The familiar, low, level stress of resentment started to simmer inside me, bada, something I was accustomed to burying under professionalism. Dylan, thankfully, was oblivious to the adult politics. He grabbed his soccer ball and shot straight out to the large, familiar backyard. My mother was already busy in the kitchen, Boda, fussing over a complicated lasagna that wouldn't be served for hours. My father was outside, fiddling with the gas grill, a familiar grounding site. Rachel joined my mother, chatting about school schedules, and I sat down, trying to engage in polite small talk with Blake about some meaningless white collar case he was currently handling. It was a performance, duh. One we all played to maintain the illusion of family cohesion. Just as Blake was dropping the name of a high-profile client he was saving from lazy prosecution, my hospital pager went off. I glanced at the number and then at my phone. It was Dr. Chen, my colleague. I excused myself and answered the call quietly in the hallway. Doctor. Chen's voice was sharp, cutting through the domestic soundscape. Joel, serious accident. Chest trauma, possible internal bleeding. Boda. We need an interventional cardiologist in the hybrid OR now. This patient won't hold. My internal switch flipped instantly from detached family member to focused professional. The stress of the high-stakes moment was immediate and absolute. A life was now depending on my speed and steady hands. I'm 20 minutes out. I confirmed, ending the call. I walked back into the living room, gathering Rachel with a look. Emergency, I said simply. Heart trauma. I have to go. Rachel, understanding the gravity of my work, immediately grabbed her keys. She knew that in a critical situation, having a driver who could make up minutes was essential. Before leaving, I found my parents. I need to run to the hospital. Could you watch Dylan and Sophie for a few hours? I'll be back as soon as the patient is stable. My mother waved a dismissive hand. Of course, dear. Go save a life. We'll feed the children lunch. My father nodded silently. I saw Dylan happily kicking the ball in the far corner of the yard. Sophie was curled up with her coloring book in the sunroom, perfectly content. They were safe at their grandparents' house, where they had always been safe. We left quickly, not realizing that, by trusting my family to perform the absolute bare minimum of protection, I had left my son exposed to the worst betrayal imaginable. Boda. The feeling of urgent duty to a stranger had completely overridden any private concerns. I had no idea I was leaving my son to face the consequences of Blake's malice alone. The emergency surgery was an intense, 3-hour blur of controlled chaos. We worked to repair a severely damaged ventricle, stitching and stabilizing a heart that had nearly stopped. By 2 o'clock, the patient was in the intensive care unit, stable and with a decent prognosis. Rachel and I grabbed a quick, exhausted lunch at the cafeteria before heading back to my parents' house, feeling that familiar, wary satisfaction of a life saved. The second we stepped through their front door, the satisfaction evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. The house was unnaturally silent. The usual background noise of 10-year-old Dylan, his bouncing, narrative energy, was absent. The living room held a toxic, heavy stillness. Sophie, our 6-year-old, was curled tightly into the corner of the sofa, pale and small, looking utterly defeated. My parents sat opposite her, rigid and avoiding eye contact. Blake, Nicole, and Austin were there too, silent, their presence adding to the uncomfortable tension. Sophie saw Rachel first. She bolted off the sofa, running to her mother like a small, terrified animal seeking shelter. Rachel dropped her bag and knelt, pulling Sophie close. Sophie's small body shook with quiet sobs. Then, through muffled tears, she delivered the incomprehensible truth. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely a thread, "the police took Dylan away." The words hit me like a physical blow, disconnecting logic from reality. My professional mind, built on logic and facts, simply could not process the combination. I stood there, utterly paralyzed for a moment, before the shock gave way to raw, frantic confusion. I spun, facing my parents, then Blake, my voice cracking, "Where is Dylan?" "What the hell does she mean? The police took him." Blake stood slowly, smoothing his expensive trousers, wearing a mask of infuriating, superior calm. He looked me straight in the eye, as if explaining a tedious legal necessity. "Your son stole my Rolex. It's worth about $15,000. He wouldn't admit it and return it, so I called the police. Actions have consequences, Joel. The authorities will teach him the lesson he needs." The room tilted. The confusion ignited into a searing, focused rage that was unlike any emotion I'd ever felt. It was cold, precise, and absolute. "You called the police on my 10-year-old son. Are you completely insane?" I could barely breathe. "He stole from me," Blake repeated, utterly devoid of empathy, treating the interaction like a simple matter of law and property. I turned to my parents, my last thread of hope unraveling. I needed them to explain this was a mistake, that they had intervened, that they had stopped this cruelty. But they just sat there, passive, guilty, refusing to meet my eyes. My mother fidgeted with her hands. My father looked down at the floor. They offered no defense for their grandson. "Dad," I demanded, the fury making my voice shake, "you let them take Dylan away. He's 10 years old." My father finally spoke, his voice low and weak. "Blake said Dylan took the watch. We asked Dylan repeatedly. He denied it, but Blake was certain. They said they had to take him down to the station for questioning. For questioning. I repeated, the word tasting like ash. You let police take my child for questioning without calling me first. I am his father. You were in surgery. My mother weakly interjected. We didn't want to disturb you during an emergency operation. The logic was so twisted, so utterly broken, that I almost laughed. A dry, strangled sound of disbelief. So instead of interrupting me for a medical emergency, Boda, you allowed them to traumatize my son and let my daughter watch it happen. You chose a family gathering's fragile peace over your grandson's safety. Blake jumped in, still calm, still entirely convinced of his righteousness. Dylan kept lying. Sometimes, Joel, kids need to learn the hard way that lying has consequences. You're too soft on him. In that moment, everything I had suppressed for 40 years, the resentment, the feeling of being inadequate, the rage at Blake's condescension, crystallized into a singular, devastating purpose. Bada. My focus shifted entirely from the abstract concern of the Rolex to the absolute, unforgivable fact of the betrayal. I pulled out my phone and called the police station, demanding to know where my son was and the name of the officer handling the case. Then, I looked at Blake, my voice dropping to the level of professional threat, cold and utterly certain. You just destroyed your own life. I hope that watch was worth it. He smirked. Don't be dramatic, Joel. It's just questioning. I didn't answer. I grabbed Rachel and Sophie, and we left, the silence of the betrayal replaced by the fierce, controlled energy of retribution. The fragile peace of the family gathering was completely and irrevocably shattered. We drove straight to the police station. The rage still burned, but the confusion was gone, replaced by the grim focus I used when operating on a fragile heart. In the back seat, Sophie held Rachel's hand, silent tears tracking down her pale cheeks. When Rachel gently asked her what happened, Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Dylan didn't take anything. Uncle Blake is lying. That small and definitive statement from our 6-year-old sealed the truth. This was not a mistake, it was an act of malice. Inside the station, I demanded to see my son. After a tense wait, an officer finally escorted us to a room. It was exactly what you imagine: gray walls, a cheap metal table bolted to the floor, and a mirror I knew was two-way glass. In that room, my 10-year-old son, Dylan, looked impossibly small, dwarfed by the institutional furniture. His eyes were red, his body language screamed fear and confusion. He was sitting on a hard chair, a child treated like a hardened criminal. The moment he saw me walk in, Dylan's composure shattered. He scrambled up, running to me and throwing his arms around my waist, his whole body shaking with sobs he'd been struggling to hold in. The tension in his small frame was palpable, a physical manifestation of the stress Blake had inflicted. Dad? I didn't take the watch, he cried, his voice muffled against my shirt. I promise I didn't. I told them so many times, but nobody believes me. Uncle Blake keeps saying I'm lying, but I'm not, Dad. I swear I'm not. The sheer desperation in his voice was devastating. This was a kid who fundamentally trusted adults, whose worldview was simple and safe, now confronted with a family member who had actively tried to crush him under the weight of a lie. I held him tightly, whispering, I believe you, buddy. We're getting you out of here. I know you didn't take anything. A minute later, Officer Wright, the man who had conducted the interrogation, entered the room. He was in his early 40s, tired, and clearly uncomfortable. The boy maintains he didn't take the watch, sir, Wright said, holding a clipboard. We've questioned him for about 90 minutes now. Without evidence or an admission, we can't really proceed. 90 minutes, I repeated slowly, keeping my voice level with tremendous effort. You questioned my 10-year-old son for 90 minutes without his parents present, without even attempting to call us first. Wright shifted his weight, avoiding my eye. The complaint came from his uncle, sir, a lawyer with good standing in the community. Mr. Blake is well known to the department. And the grandparents confirmed they had custodial supervision at the time since you were unreachable during surgery. Custodial supervision doesn't supersede parental rights, I countered. The doctor's precision replacing the father's panic. Did your protocol include checking if the $15,000 watch was actually missing, Officer Wright? Or did you simply take my brother's word and drag my child away in handcuffs based on nothing but his accusation? The officer's face showed a flicker of something. Guilt, perhaps, or the dawning realization of a procedural error. We operate on good faith when the complaint comes from an attorney and a family member, sir. Bota. Blake insisted the watch was taken and that your son was the only person who could have taken it. He was very convincing. And the handcuffs, I pressed, unable to ignore the small, terrible detail. Was that protocol too? Wright's discomfort deepened. Handcuffs weren't strictly necessary, no, given the child's age. But Mr. Blake insisted on standard arrest procedure. He said it was important the boy understood the seriousness of theft charges, that he needed to experience consequences to learn. That was the final confirmation. Blake hadn't just called the police, Bota. He had specifically engineered the maximum amount of trauma, Bota, demanding that my 10-year-old be treated like a dangerous criminal for the sake of his twisted lesson. Bota. I released Dylan and turned back to Wright, my voice now cold and precise as a scalpel. I want to file a formal complaint right now against my brother for filing a false police report and against whoever authorized questioning a minor for 90 minutes without parental notification. I want copies of every document, the report, the interrogation notes, the recordings. All of it. Wright nodded, looking defeated. I can arrange that, sir. But I must tell you, your brother has significant connections with this department. This could get complicated if you pursue it. Let it get complicated, I said, meeting his gaze directly. He traumatized my child over a lie. That will have consequences. And if those consequences make people in this department uncomfortable, they should have thought of that before they handcuffed a 10-year-old. We walked out with Dylan clinging to me. The anger focused into a singular, unwavering resolve. I had a job to do, and it wasn't to fix hearts anymore. It was to tear down an entire edifice of lies and betrayal. We immediately began the process of finding the right legal representation, seeking a lawyer who specialized in fighting not just crimes, but professional misconduct. The fight had started. The days immediately following Dylan's interrogation were consumed by two tasks: comforting our children and launching the counter. attack. Rachel became the emotional anchor, keeping Dylan and Sophie's routines stable, while I focused on the legal strategy. The doctor's cold precision took over. I needed a specialist, someone who fought not just cases, but systems. By Monday, I was sitting across from Jennifer Walsh, an attorney known for dismantling professional misconduct cases. I handed Walsh the police file, the formal complaint I'd insisted on filing, and the raw fear I was still carrying. She listened, and taking meticulous notes on Blake's connections and my parents' complete complicity. "This is actionable, Joel," she concluded, her voice sharp. "But we need proof that the watch wasn't just misplaced. We need to weaponize the truth." Our first objective was to gather every piece of information the police department had tried to withhold. Walsh immediately filed motions demanding the full interrogation records and, most critically, the audio recordings. The department fought it, citing Blake's influence, but Walsh was relentless. Within a week, the files and the recording arrived. I sat alone in my home office, the recording loaded onto my computer. The surgical intensity returned, overriding the father's emotion, because I knew I had to listen without breaking. 90 minutes of my son's voice. I heard Dylan, small and scared, repeating over and over, "I didn't take it. I promise." His voice would get thinner and more panicked as Officer Wright pressed him to confess. Boda. It was one of the most difficult things I have ever endured. But the recording yielded something more terrible than trauma. It captured Blake's voice. Blake, the successful defense attorney, could be heard coaching Wright. "He's a talented liar, officer, ta. You need to push harder. Ask him about where he hid the funds. Make him understand the weight of a felony charge." Hearing my brother use his intimate knowledge of interrogation tactics to deliberately terrorize my 10-year-old nephew filled me with an utterly cold, singular disgust. It wasn't about theft, it was about power and cruelty. Walsh wasn't finished. She knew we needed to prove the theft was fabricated. She subpoenaed Blake's financial records and insurance claims, looking for any evidence related to the supposed $15,000 Rolex. A few days later, her office called me with the devastating confirmation. "Your brother wasn't just lying about Dylan stealing the watch, Joel," Walsh said. "He was lying about owning it. 6 months ago, Blake filed a claim stating the Rolex was damaged beyond repair and unwearable. He received a payout of $14,000 from his insurance company. The air went out of my lungs. The entire incident, Boda, the false accusation, and the trauma was based on a watch that was either destroyed or was the subject of insurance fraud. Blake hadn't been teaching Dylan a lesson. He had been maliciously destroying my son to assert dominance or cover up his fraud. The case instantly escalated from a custody issue into a criminal matter involving multiple felonies. When Walsh presented this irrefutable evidence, the insurance claim documentation paired with the false police report, the district attorney's office launched an immediate investigation into Blake. Suddenly, his connections didn't matter. A case involving an attorney facing fraud and false charges against his own nephew was a public relations gift for the DA's office. As the legal wheels began to turn, the internal family chaos intensified. My parents started calling. My mother was tearful, pleading, Why are you escalating this, Joel? Blake made a mistake. My father, using his stern voice, demanded, You are tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. Blake even tried, alternating between threats of a lawsuit and suggesting we could work this out like brothers. I blocked them all. Every number, every email. Rachel did the same. We had spent enough years swallowing their toxic behavior in the name of peace. Bota. My parents tried to show up at our home one evening bearing gifts, the classic attempt to smooth over generational trauma with consumer goods. I saw them through the window, my father holding a plant, my mother clutching a shopping bag. I didn't open the door. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. I yelled through the closed door, my voice calm but absolute. Joel, please. We just want to talk like adults. My mother cried back. Adults don't let police handcuff their 10-year-old grandson over a lie. I replied. Adults don't side with a fraudster over the victim. Get off my property. They finally left, Boda. But not before I called 911 and reported them for trespassing and attempted witness intimidation. Every desperate move they made to stop me simply added another layer of documented misconduct to the growing case file. The rage had cooled entirely, replaced by the grim satisfaction of knowing that I was building a case that would systematically dismantle their lives. The legal process, once started, moved with the systematic force I had intended. Jennifer Walsh had successfully compartmentalized the case, choosing to target Officer Wright first. He was the instrument of the trauma, the one who violated the legal safeguards that should have protected my son. With the evidence compiled, the documented failure to notify parents, the extended 90-minute interrogation, and the clear procedural breaches, the case against him was irrefutable. We sat in the courtroom, Rachel holding my hand, her presence a quiet, steady strength. Dylan was not present for most of the testimony, protected by the court from further distress, but the child psychologist who had examined him offered testimony that was damning. She detailed the acute trauma Dylan suffered, the anxiety, the nightmares, the fear whenever he saw a police cruiser, and the deep-seated trust issues planted by his uncle's betrayal. Right. The officer attempted a defense. He claimed he was simply following orders, that he had no reason to doubt the word of Blake, a well-known attorney who was a friend to the department. He tried to portray himself as a victim of Blake's deceit, arguing that the chaotic environment of a family dispute made him overlook protocol, BOTA. But the evidence of the procedural violations was too clear. Walsh systematically dismantled his claim that handcuffing a non-violent 10-year-old was a standard, necessary measure, BOTA. The most visceral moment came when Walsh played the recording. The courtroom, usually filled with low murmurs and the scratching of pens, BOTA, fell into absolute silence. The jury heard it all, the institutional tone of the interrogation, and then the high, thin, frightened voice of my 10-year-old son repeatedly insisting I didn't take it. And then Blake's lawyerly voice, cold and precise, interjecting, push harder. He's trying to hide the money. He's a skilled liar. The recording laid bare the calculated cruelty. Bada. This was not a professional mistake. It was an act of collaboration between a lawyer abusing his power and an officer neglecting his duty, resulting in the terrorization of a child. I looked at Wright as the recording played, and he kept his head bowed, his face flushed with shame and dread. He was seeing his entire career, his entire life, reduced to 90 minutes of unforgivable error. The jury returned their verdict in less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts, Bada, including violating procedure regarding minors and constitutional rights violations. Bada. Wright was immediately fired from the police force and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The judge also ordered him to pay Dylan $1.5 million in damages. As the sentence was read, Wright began to cry, his shoulders shaking as the magnitude of his fall registered. His career, his public trust, everything he had built, was destroyed by his choice to trust the wrong man and enforce a malicious lie. Watching him break was a strange moment. It brought a flash of satisfaction, but not the pure, clean feeling I expected. It was a cold victory, a necessary step. I had achieved the first part of my objective. The instrument of injustice had paid the price. But the initial focus of my rage, the primary architect of the betrayal, still waited. His trial was next, and I knew it would be far more devastating. Boda. The satisfaction of justice quickly gave way to the renewed intensity needed for the next battle. Wright's trial was finished, but the retribution was far from complete. With Officer Wright sentenced, the entire legal system turned its focus onto my brother, Blake. If Wright's trial was brutal, Blake's was devastating, an absolute dismantling of the successful farce he had spent a lifetime constructing. This time, the charges were serious. Filing a false police report and attempted insurance fraud. Blake tried every tactic he knew. He called in favors, relied on colleagues for character witnesses, and attempted to paint the incident as a misunderstanding or a lapse of judgment between brothers. Boda. His lawyer argued that Joel was maliciously seeking revenge due to lifelong jealousy. Boda. But none of his legal maneuvering could withstand the combined weight of the evidence Walsh presented. To Saboda. The jury was presented with the documented insurance claim proving the Rolex was already damaged and paid out. This revealed the theft accusation against Dylan was a calculated lie, either to secure a double payout or to cover up the original fraud. Blake wasn't just mistaken, he was actively dishonest and criminally motivated. Then came the centerpiece of the prosecution, the recording. Jennifer Walsh played the entire 90 minutes again. But this time, the focus was entirely on Blake's interjections. The courtroom heard the successful attorney, the golden child, cold-bloodedly instructing a police officer on how to break his 10-year-old nephew, urging him to push harder. The recording stripped away the suits and the lawyerly rhetoric, exposing a man who used his professional power for calculated malice against a child. The jury, comprised of ordinary people, saw through the arrogance. They didn't see a successful lawyer who made a mistake, Boda. They saw a powerful man who used his position to terrorize an innocent child. The deliberation was swift. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was severe 4 years in prison, plus a $500,000 fine in damages to Dylan. But the true, absolute destruction of Blake's life came with the announcement of his permanent disbarment. All the years of law school, the network, the prestige he obsessed over, the career he built his entire identity around, gone. I watched Blake to Saboda, who had always maintained an image of impenetrable superiority, physically break down in the courtroom when the ruling was read. Boda. All that relentless effort to be the best, the most successful, evaporated in a single judicial pronouncement. His firm shut down within the week. All those connections he had bragged about, the judges and prosecutors he played golf with, Boda, instantly vanished. No one wants to be associated with a disbarred attorney heading to prison for fraud and victimizing his nephew. His wife, Nicole, sat in the back row, looking utterly devastated. The high cost of Blake's false pride and fraud was finally coming due for his entire household. During this intense period, the non-criminal matter of my parents also reached its conclusion. I sought a permanent restraining order against them. The judge reviewed the evidence, their failure to protect Dylan, their full support of Blake's false narrative, Boda, and their subsequent attempts to trespass and intimidate us into dropping the charges. The ruling was clear, Boda. The court granted the permanent restraining order, prohibiting my parents from coming within 500 feet of me, Rachel, Dylan, or Sophie, or initiating contact in any form. My mother wept openly in the court when the order was read, while my father simply looked old and defeated. Boda. I felt nothing for them. They had made a choice. They chose the golden child and his lie over their traumatized grandson. That choice brought an absolute, final conclusion to our relationship. The wave of cold vengeance finally receded. The external enemies were defeated, convicted, disbarred, and legally barred from our lives. The core objective was achieved. The careers and lives of everyone involved in the betrayal were destroyed. But the fight was over, and now we were left with the aftermath, the slow, painful work of healing. 2 years passed since the final verdicts were read and the restraining order was issued. The intense, consuming fury that had driven me through the trials slowly gave way to a quiet, profound sense of stability. The vengeance was complete, Boda, and now I faced the difficult work of rebuilding a sense of safety for my children. The vengeance was complete, and now I faced the difficult work of rebuilding a sense of safety for my children. The chaos was gone, replaced by the deep peace of removing toxic elements entirely. The work of healing was long, but kids are resilient. Dylan, now 12, had counseling that helped him process the trauma and anxiety. The nightmares about the police faded, and his inherent, sunny nature returned. He now excels on his school soccer team, his energy once again directed toward joyful pursuits. Sometimes, watching him run on the field, Boda, I remember that scared 10-year-old in the interrogation room, and I'm filled with immense gratitude that we were able to save him from that darkness. Sophie, 8 now, Boda, benefited perhaps the most from the final severing. Without the subtle, oppressive tension of my parents and Blake, she came out of her shell. She is still quiet, but now she laughs easily and talks openly during family dinners. No longer retreating into the protective silence she adopted around them. Rachel and I realized she had always instinctively sensed the danger and toxicity those relationships represented. Rachel was the reason we survived intact. She was the absolute constant, Ada, the emotional anchor who kept Dylan and Sophie feeling safe and loved, while I was consumed by the calculated legal vengeance. My emotional arc, Boda, which had started as guarded and snapped into cold vengeance, Finally settled into embracing vulnerability. Vulnerability only with Rachel and my children, recognizing that this small, protected unit was the only family I needed. My parents made one final attempt to cross the line. About a year after the trials, they tried to show up at Dylan's school, thinking they could perhaps catch him during recess or a field pickup. The school administrators, who had been given copies of the permanent restraining order, called me immediately. I called the police. They documented the violation, and the message was received: there would be no forgiveness, and there would be immediate, documented consequences for every transgression. They have not tried again since. I have no contact with them. I have no contact with Blake, who is serving his sentence. Boda, I hear through distant relatives the prison has stripped away his arrogance, leaving behind a bitter man without his connections. Boda, I lose no sleep over it. I destroyed 3 careers, but in doing so, I saved my son's future and reclaimed the health of my immediate family. The rage is gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that I made the only moral choice. Some things cannot be forgiven. Boda. When you let police handcuff and traumatize your 10-year-old grandson over a lie, you forfeit your right to be family. We now live a life of hard, one peace, a testament to the fact that justice, though cold and professional, and can sometimes serve as the necessary surgery for a broken heart.